routine that I've learned to understand and know.
So while this will be a thoughts video on Death Stranding, I do plan on doing a full review of the game down the line. My time for reviews right now is just extremely short this month, and I want to talk about this game before I head off to Japan for the end of the year. Death Stranding. It's a game I don't think many people thought would actually come out, especially anytime soon, and yet here it is, and somehow it's become one of the most divisive games of the last few years. It's essentially just Euro Truck Simulator meets Metal Gear Solid 5 and The Postman, but people like to think it's either the best or worst game ever. It's neither. It's a middle-of-the-road game that is going to appeal to a very niche audience of gamers. Death Stranding feels like $1 million student film, and I mean that for the better and for worse. It's clear that Kojima made what he wanted to, but quite a bit of the time, the game ends up sadly suffering because it didn't have more focus on what it wanted to be. But there is still some good that shines through and proves that there is still some decent moments here to enjoy. You play as Sam Bridges, a courier living in a torn-apart America after an apocalyptic event known as the Death Stranding occurred. Even though the world is practically ended, you still must do your job as a glorified Amazon delivery man to deliver packages no matter what. From corpses that act as nuclear weapons, to strange oily ghosts known as BTs, to almost superhuman people with odd quirks, things are not as they once were for the American people, but at the same time, they are, as even though reality is constantly warping, the American people continue on as best as they can, trying to piece back together the country one step at a time. However, upon the secret death of the last elected president, Brigitte Strand, Sam is enlisted into the secret goal of rebuilding America under her successor, Emily's request. After rescuing a defective bridge baby by the name of BB and being a cast of quirky misfits, Sam begins his literal cross-country journey to save the future of mankind. I really did like the story of Death Stranding when I actually got to experience the story through cutscenes and important missions. The problem is, however, is that a good deal of the missions themselves are completely menial side tasks that are presented as important because a side character will tell you that it is. When the story was going strong, I was definitely invested, but as cutscenes started to get farther apart, so did my attention to actually want to keep playing the game. The side stories themselves sadly really weren't all that gripping, and when there was one I might have been interested in, it was usually text only, and I found that to be extremely disappointing. While I did like the story overall, there is still a lot of stupidly simple stuff and some overly complex stuff that doesn't make any real sense, and I really don't even think Kojima himself understands half of what he wrote. I guess that's why I both love and hate the reality shift that is going on. It allows both creativity and laziness for both story and gameplay. While I don't want to spoil any more of the story than I have experienced, just know that there is a terror cell out destroying cities and a mysterious figure wanting to put an end to all your hard work, not to mention the mystery of your bridge baby, amply named BB. The writing ranged from your typical Kojima charm of otaku interests such as movies and video games to his gross out sense of humor and simple philosophy ideals. It wasn't bad, but it was very simple. Sam was an alright protagonist, even if he had the cliche I dislike of a character who was so stubborn they never stop saying how stubborn they are, but still do what they are asked to do. He does have some growth over the opening of the game, and I liked all the little touches of character he has, from commenting about his journey to breaking the fourth wall. I also really liked his in-cutscene relationship with BB. It was very sweet, and I liked how they looked out for each other. Too bad BB was an utter tear in the gameplay and sound department, but we'll save that here for a little bit. The cast of characters is your typical Kojima fare of weirdos and otakus, but only a handful of them really shine in the first 11 hours. Deadman was probably my favorite character out of the cast, and I really wish he got more screen time in the early parts of the game. Mama was kind of forgettable, but I still liked her. I wish Die Hard Man had more to talk about other than just orders, and I sort of feel the same about Amelie, who was supposed to have this emotional connection to Sam, but I just didn't care much for her. Hartman was just there for Kojima to flex his grade school philosophy and humor, and then there was Fragile. I really didn't like Fragile. Fragile seemed to be the emotional support for Sam, but god, she got on my nerves with her constant gag of trying to offer Sam some bugs to eat.
Need a pick-me-up? Something to eat? Snack?
And and just how boring her character is overall. She didn't add anything, and it's a real shame that she plays such an important role, since so far, she is by far my least favorite of the entire cast. Seriously, some of the minor characters do a much better job than her, and she's one of the central characters in the opening. In the gameplay department, this is probably where I have equal parts good and bad to say about the game. One of the biggest problems for sure is the game doesn't really know what it wants to be. Part of it wants to be an exploration survival game, some of it wants to be a third-person action game, and then the last bit of it wants to be a management sim of sorts with social media elements. Some of these things are alright. For example, it is, half the time, exciting and interesting to explore the countryside to deliver a new package. It's not, however, when you've done it several times over and you just wish there was a fast travel system that actually worked compared to how it's actually done in-game. The most important piece of equipment Sam has was himself. He can get hurt, thirsty, tired, and you will have to make sure you tend to those things by letting him sleep, drink, change clothes so his feet don't get destroyed by worn out boots, piss, take showers, and lots of other things. Naturally, he has a weight limit to what he can carry, and is usually fairly generous, usually allow you to carry what you need for the quest. Sometimes you'll need the aid of a vehicle, but that wasn't too often. One of the major problems with how Sam carries stuff is the clunky and counterintuitive inventory system. While the menus do have an auto balance feature, I really wish the game allowed you to tweak every bit of luggage Sam might have to carry. The menus all visually reminded me of Metal Gear Solid 5, like a lot of the game, but it felt a lot less fluid, sadly. Sam has a scanner tool that actually has its own personality thanks to BB, and it'll let him know if the environment he is stepping on will allow his weight or balance, or if it will cause him to topple over. Once you figure out how to read the scanner's notes, you'll be just fine, especially if you hold down the L2 and R2 buttons to keep your balance. Using the ladders was a bit tough when placing them down, since it never seemed to balance just right, especially when using them as bridges. I never actually found a use for them to climb things because Sam climbed things just fine on his own. But the climbing rope, that works great, and it was incredibly satisfying to use. I also really enjoy the hover carts you get in the farmland. You get a lot of neat equipment as you do quests, and it really does feel like Sam was building up an arsenal of things to use. Speaking of arsenal, let's quickly talk about the combat, or the real lack of it. It's clear Kojima wanted the game to be very pacifistic, especially since you annoyingly get punished for running over enemies or harming them in any super dangerous ways like that, but the action of the game really suffers because of it. I get that there is a plot reason for not killing anyone, that being that they basically go off like a nuke if they die, but it feels so shoehorned in to preach Kojima's anti-violence message. Why I say that is that in the first 11 hours or so, if you get into combat, for the first 7 hours, you only get your fist to defend yourself against human enemies, and later a stun gun that stuns your enemies for maybe a minute or two. It's really short and kinda useless. That's it in terms of weapons against humans so far. For the BTs, you gotta grenade mow your piss and shit, and yes, I'm not making that up. Your BT weapons use your bodily waste. It's as unfunny and as gross as it sounds. I kind of thought maybe Sam would have something like the suits in Dune that recycle his body liquids because his canteen can change any liquid into Monster Energy drink. But nah, let's use it to kill the universe oil ghosts or whatever they are. There were two types of enemies: the human mules, who were addicted scavengers, and the BTs, the oily ghost monsters. Mules were essentially harmless in the sense that they didn't kill Sam, just stun him and steal his stuff, but they were a real pain and honestly were better just being avoided if you had a vehicle, or again, knocked out if you had the proper equipment. Although fighting them is really not all that hard. Although I will say hitting the mules with your stun gun was incredibly satisfying. BTs, on the other hand, really dragged down the game a whole lot like they dragged down Sam. While you could knock out mules with your fists and actually dispatch them for the time being, BTs come up in random as far as I could tell, since even though there were sort of designated areas, they would still pop up outside of those zones and really screw you over, especially if you had an important delivery. At best, you're able to outrun them if you have a vehicle or you have flat terrain you can run down, or at worst, you accidentally get trapped and yanked away by one, losing some luggage that will most likely get damaged, and you'll have to fight your way to get back to it. And the major boss battle with one wasn't fun either. They feel really tacked on to mix up the gameplay, and I wish that your first weapon wasn't a thrown grenade, instead being a projectile weapon of sorts. Heck, a slingshot that could fire the grenades would have been great. Just anything but grenades themselves. Also accompanying the BTs as a usual annoyance, time distortion rain that ruins your equipment casing and items. Sure, you can fix it with some item fix spray, but I didn't like how constant the rain was due to it making certain paths really hard to navigate. Yes, you could pee whenever you wanted to, and it actually played into the gameplay if you drank too much Monster. You'll be drinking a lot of Monster Energy drinks. The construction system didn't really feel all that easy to understand or functional, since the few times I wanted to use it, even if I was in the permitted areas, I still couldn't seem to get it to work to build a bridge or the like. Plus, it just took so much more time to build a bit of road road that I could be putting towards actually pushing the story forward, because that's what I'm interested in. It's nice that the building aspect is there, but I didn't like how it was implemented. I wish that you could build on any surface or terraform certain things, but that just wasn't the case. Finally, in terms of the gameplay, at least in terms of what I want to talk about without giving everything away, is the vehicles and the fast travel system. First, the fast travel system. It's garbage. I know it's to prevent you from spamming it, but every time you use it, you have to watch a cutscene, and then a bunch of other cutscenes. There's just a lot of cutscenes, and you can't even bring your gear with you. At least let me bring some of my gear. Come on now. Honestly, it takes less time to drive to your location than it does to let the game actually load. The first time you get the reverse trike motorcycle, oh, it's pure bliss and filled me with so much excitement. And yes, while it's still fun to ride around the wasteland in the vehicles, the reverse trike especially, the vehicles aren't all that great to control in reality. And I don't even mean in terms of in-universe reasons. They should be really fluid, but they aren't. They just felt sort of clunky, and even worse than the vehicles in Metal Gear Solid 5. Again, Kojima had a lot to learn about the open world, especially with the vehicles and how they handle, and they just feel worse than his previous game. The trucks were especially bad, but the motorbikes still had some moments of extreme jake themselves, which was not good while running away from BTs. Trust me, getting caught on what you think is a jump was really not fun. The game is visually a masterpiece, for the most part. The game is definitely beautiful and serene, but it still feels pretty darn empty some places. I know the country was torn apart, but I feel if there was more buildings or similar such things scattered around, it would have been more visually captivating when not at certain landmark locations, like the forest or waterfalls. Said landmarks, however, look incredible, and you really do feel like you're on a grand adventure, which I loved. The development team really knew what they were doing, because outside of some very rare stutter when I loaded into the game for a single moment, the game ran flawlessly without any lost frames or slowdown. I am running it on a PS4 Pro, but goodness is it impressive. The character models looked incredible and somehow managed to avoid the uncanny valley, even though there were moments when the game did look like an actual movie in the cutscenes. I'm not always the biggest fan of real actors being in the game, especially some of the celebrity cameos like Conan or Jeff Keighley or whatever the Game Awards guy's name is, but I felt Norman Reedus and the other main actors did a really nice job and fit their roles. Again though, Fragile and the person who played young Sam were the weakest of the cast. I just didn't care for their actors. The cutscenes were perfectly directed, well, when characters weren't just standing around. There was a constant sense of urgency conveyed by the way the camera and shots were done, and I was all there for it. I sort of wish this was a movie instead of a game, honestly, because it's clear that Kojima is a great director. He just needs someone to hold his creative leash and do the rewriting of his scripts so they actually make sense and don't seem so juvenile. Probably the only part of the game I have literally nothing bad to say about is the soundtrack. The audio itself is hit or miss, with BB being one of the most annoying video game gameplay additions in recent memory. And the BTs and Mule's horns sounded horribly obnoxious, but I can overlook those for the most part when my ears are treated to fantastic choices in soundtrack.
I'm not here. There must be some mistake. Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious. Give me hope and give me doubt. Well, I loved you then, but I don't love you now. Would I be crazy enough to follow? Or let the regret eat me out?
Lil Roar was honestly the perfect choice for the main band to ask to have their music star in the game. Sure, there are other musicians in the game for sure, and they fit the somber tone, but Don't Be So Serious is quite honestly the perfect opening track, and the game's OST itself was also really great, with some hauntingly instrumental tech tracks that I highly enjoyed. And with all that said, Death Stranding still has extremely mixed feelings from me. On one hand, yeah, I really do like a lot of what is on offer here. On the other, however, the game just does a lot plot wrong and drags the overall experience down. If the game managed to have its plot be more concentrated, and the side stuff be more out of the story's main way, along with having better gameplay overall, along with the shorter length that isn't 50 hours, the game would definitely be fantastic. Because honestly, I really do like a lot of the atmospheric survival exploration on offer. But as it stands, if this seems like the type of game you'd enjoy, wait until it goes on sale, or borrow or rent it before you buy. It's a very niche styled game that is slow and more about the journey and experiences than other sorts of content that it has to offer. This isn't the worst game ever, or the best game ever. It's just a game that will have its audience, but Kojima shouldn't expect praise for a game that is honestly made for such a small group of people. As always, if you want to help support the channel, please consider sharing the video with a friend or checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them down below as I read and reply to everything. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya guys!